He walked in, broken and ready to give up, but when the therapist told him, "You already paid with your service," everything changed. Until the heartbreaking truth about his past put everything on the line, and his daughter's future was at risk. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The winter wind whipped around Clint Rhodes as he stood frozen outside the plain brick building, his weathered hands gripping his coat so tightly his knuckles had turned white. The brass numbers on the door, 342, seemed to mock him, reminding him of all the days he'd driven past this place without stopping. His breath came out in visible puffs in the cold morning air, matching the rapid beating of his heart. A young mother hustled past him with her child, offering a quick smile that Clint couldn't return. His jaw felt locked, his entire body rigid with tension. He'd faced enemy fire, navigated through minefields, led men through impossible situations. But this felt different. This felt like surrender. The pamphlet in his coat pocket crinkled as he shifted his weight. Dr. Linda Martinez, Professional Counseling Services. Sarah's school counselor had given it to him 3 weeks ago, after his daughter's third unexplained absence from class. Sometimes, the counselor had said gently, helping ourselves is the first step to helping our children. Clint's hand trembled as he reached for the door handle, then dropped back to his side. The morning traffic hummed behind him on the busy street, and somewhere nearby, a car horn blared. The sound made him flinch, his body automatically tensing for action. Even after all these years, the reflexes remained. Hadn't been for a long time. Now he was just a man, a broken man, if he was honest with himself, trying to hold together the pieces of his life with Sarah. Sarah. The thought of his daughter sent a fresh wave of pain through his chest. She was 14 now, her eyes holding the same haunted look he sometimes caught in his own reflection. Last week, he'd found her crying in her room, and when he'd tried to comfort her, she'd pulled away. "You don't understand," she'd said. "You never talk about anything real." The words had cut deep because they were true. He didn't talk about the real things, the nightmares that still woke him in cold sweats, the way certain sounds made his heart race, the guilt that ate at him daily. He didn't talk about her mother leaving, about how some days it took everything he had just to get out of bed. A gust of wind sent a newspaper scuttling across the sidewalk. Clint watched it dance away, feeling as lost and directionless as that piece of paper. The weight of his service weapon, which he still carried with his security guard license, pressed against his side. A constant reminder of who he'd been, who he still was in some ways. The door to the building opened, and an elderly man stepped out, nodding politely as he passed. The warm air from inside brushed against Clint's face, carrying the scent of coffee and artificial air freshener. His appointment time was in 5 minutes. Dr. Martinez would be waiting. Clint closed his eyes, remembering the moment he'd finally called to make the appointment. It had been after midnight, Sarah's words echoing in his head, making sleep impossible. The receptionist's voice had been kind, non-judgmental. "The first step is often the hardest," she'd said, as if she'd known exactly who she was talking to. His fingers brushed against the door handle again, and this time, he forced himself to grip it. The metal felt cold and solid beneath his hand, real, like the ground beneath his feet, like the air in his lungs, like the pain he carried inside. "For Sarah," he whispered, though he knew it had to be for himself, too. His daughter deserved more than a father who was just going through the motions, who couldn't meet her emotional needs because he couldn't face his own. The door opened with a soft click, and Clint stepped into the warmth of the building. The lobby was simple, beige walls, a few plants, comfortable-looking chairs. A sign directed him to the second floor. Each step up the stairs felt like lifting weights, his combat boots heavy on the carpeted steps. Suite 204, Doctor. Martinez's name was stenciled on the door in simple black letters. Clint's hand hovered over the handle for a long moment before he pushed it open. The reception area was small but welcoming, with soft lighting and peaceful landscape paintings on the walls. The woman behind the desk looked up with a gentle smile. "Mr. Rhodes?" she asked, and he managed a nod. "Dr. Martinez will be with you in just a moment. Please have a seat." Clint lowered himself into one of the chairs, his body stiff and uncomfortable. His eyes darted around the room, taking in the exits, the windows, the other doors, old habits that had kept him alive once, but now just reminded him how different he was from everyone else. A coffee table in front of him held magazines, Time, People, National Geographic. The normalcy of it all felt strange. In one corner, a small fountain bubbled quietly, probably meant to be soothing, but to Clint it just marked the seconds ticking by. He resisted the urge to get up and walk out. His hands clasped together in his lap, squeezing tight enough to hurt. On the wall across from him, a clock ticked steadily, and he found himself counting the seconds, using the old breathing techniques he'd learned in the service. 4 counts in, 4 counts out. A door opened, and a woman in her 50s appeared, her dark hair streaked with gray, her smile warm and professional. "Mr. Rhodes? I'm Dr. Martinez. Would you like to come in?" Clint stood up, his legs feeling unsteady beneath him. He followed her into her office, noting the comfortable-looking chairs, the degrees on the wall, the box of tissues placed discreetly on a side table. Everything about the room was designed to put people at ease, but Clint felt anything but easy as he lowered himself into one of the chairs. He sat there awkwardly, his large frame seeming out of place among the calm, ordered atmosphere of the therapy office. His eyes moved from the degrees on the wall to the small Zen garden on a shelf, to the window that looked out over the city, anywhere but at Dr. Martinez, who sat quietly in her chair, waiting for him to find his voice. The therapy office was nothing like Clint had imagined. Instead of the cold clinical space he'd expected, warm autumn colors filled the room. Soft beige walls hosted peaceful landscape paintings, and a potted plant stretched its leaves in the corner near a window. The leather armchair he sat in was worn but comfortable, though his stiff posture prevented him from settling into it. Dr. Emma Harris sat across from him, her presence calm and steady. She wore simple clothes, a navy sweater and dark slacks, and her graying hair was pulled back in a neat bun. Her reading glasses hung from a chain around her neck, catching the soft light from the table lamp beside her. "Would you like some water?" she asked, gesturing to a small side table with a pitcher and glasses. Clint shook his head. His hands rested on his knees, ready to push himself up and leave at any moment. The ticking of the wall clock seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet room. "Well, Clint," Emma began, her voice gentle but professional, "why don't you tell me what brought you here today?" The question hung in the air. Clint's jaw tightened. He'd rehearsed this moment in his truck a dozen times, but now the words felt stuck in his throat. "My daughter," he finally managed. "Sarah." Emma nodded encouragingly, her pen resting unused on her notepad. "How old is Sarah?" 15. The word came easier. This time, "She's a good kid. Smart. You sound proud of her." "I am." Clint's shoulders lowered slightly. "But lately, things haven't been right between us." Emma leaned forward slightly, her eyes kind but direct. "Can you tell me more about that?" Clint's fingers drummed against his knee. "I'm not good at this, talking about feelings and such. There's no right or wrong way to talk here," Emma assured him. "Whatever you're comfortable sharing is fine." A car horn blared outside, making Clint flinch. His hands clenched involuntarily, and he noticed Emma watching his reaction, though her expression remained unchanged. "How long were you in the service?" she asked quietly. Clint's eyes narrowed.
15 years.
"How did your posture, the way you positioned yourself in the room, facing the door, back to the wall?" She smiled softly. "I've worked with many veterans." Something in her matter-of-fact tone made Clint relax slightly. She wasn't trying to analyze him or fix him. She was just stating what she saw. "Iraq and Afghanistan," he said. "3 tours." Emma nodded. "That's a long time to be away from home." "From Sarah." "Her mother took care of her then." Clint's voice hardened. "Before the divorce." "And now?" "Now it's just us. Have been for 5 years." Clint shifted in his chair. "Sarah stays with her mother every other weekend, but mostly it's just me and her." Emma let the silence stretch comfortably before asking, "What's the hardest part about being a single father?" Clint hadn't expected that question. He looked down at his hands, calloused and strong, but feeling utterly useless when it came to connecting with his teenage daughter. Not knowing if I'm doing it right, he admitted. The military, that was clear. You had objectives, protocols, but this. Parenting doesn't come with a manual, Emma agreed. No, it doesn't. Clint's voice grew quiet. And sometimes things happen that aren't in any manual anyway. Emma waited, giving him space to continue or stop. Last week, Clint said, his voice rough, Sarah dropped a pan while cooking. The clang. He stopped, his throat tight. I ended up behind the couch. Didn't even realize I'd moved. Sarah found me there, breathing hard, sweating, the look on her face. He shook his head. She shouldn't have to see her father like that. PTSD can be very challenging for families, Emma said gently, both for the person experiencing it and their loved ones. Clint's jaw clenched. I should be stronger than this. Strength isn't about not having struggles, Emma replied. It's about facing them. The clock ticked steadily as Clint absorbed her words. His fingers traced a scar on his hand absently. Sarah deserves better. She deserves her father. Emma corrected softly. And you're here, trying to be better for her. That matters. The session time was drawing to a close. Clint reached for his wallet, but Emma held up her hand. You've already paid with your service, she said simply. Clint stared at her, confusion evident on his face. The words hit something deep inside him, something he couldn't quite name. He opened his mouth to protest, but no words came out. Emma stood, signaling the end of their time. Same time next week? Clint nodded slowly, still processing her words as he rose from the chair. The room suddenly felt different, less threatening, more like a shelter from the storm raging inside him. He wasn't sure what to make of Emma's gesture or her words, but something had shifted, ever so slightly, in the way the world felt around him. Clint stepped out of the therapy office into the cool evening air. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, leaving streaks of purple and orange in the darkening sky. Emma's final words echoed in his mind. You've already paid with your service. He couldn't shake the feeling that she had seen right through him, past all his carefully constructed walls. His truck waited in the parking lot. It's a familiar sanctuary. Inside, he gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white. The engine hummed to life, but he sat there for a moment, trying to process everything that had happened in that room. Part of him felt exposed, raw, like someone had peeled back a bandage he'd rather leave alone. Another part felt lighter. He couldn't quite name it. The drive home took him past familiar landmarks. The grocery store where he bought Sarah's favorite cereal. The park where she used to play when she was younger. The elementary school she now attended. Each sight tugged at his conscience, reminding him of all the times he'd been physically present, but emotionally distant. When he pulled into their driveway, the porch light was on, casting a warm glow across their modest, single-story house. Mrs. Martinez, their elderly neighbor who watched Sarah after school, waved from her window. Clint raised his hand in acknowledgement, grateful for her help, but feeling that familiar twist of guilt about needing it in the first place. Inside, Sarah sat cross-legged on the living room couch, already dressed in her favorite star-patterned pajamas. Her long brown hair was still damp from her evening shower, and she clutched her worn copy of Bridge to Terabithia, the book they were supposed to be reading together. Hey, kiddo, Clint said, hanging up his jacket. Sorry I'm late. Sarah looked up, offering a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. It's okay, Dad. Her voice was quiet, missing its usual energy. She fidgeted with the corner of her book, a habit she'd picked up when something was bothering her. Clint sat down beside her, noticing how she seemed to curl in on herself slightly. Did you finish your homework? Yeah. She nodded, still focused on the book's corner. Mrs. Martinez helped me with my math. That's good. Clint cleared his throat, searching for words. Everything else okay? Sarah shrugged, a gesture that spoke volumes. Just tired, I guess. But Clint knew his daughter. The slight downturn of her mouth, the way she avoided his eyes, something was wrong. He remembered Emma's words about opening up, about how children often mirror their parents' emotional patterns. Taking a deep breath, he tried something different. "You know," he said, keeping his voice gentle, "when I was your age, sometimes I had days that weren't so great, days when everything felt heavy." Sarah's fingers stopped fidgeting with the book. She glanced up at him, surprise flickering across her face. "Really? Really?" Clint shifted on the couch, turning to face her more directly. "Want to tell me about your day?" For a moment, Sarah seemed to consider his question, weighing whether to share or retreat into silence, a habit she'd learned from him, he realized with a pang. "Jamie said some mean things at lunch," she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. About how I don't have a mom around, and about you being different since coming back from the war." The words hit Clint like a physical blow. His first instinct was to withdraw, to mumble some platitude about kids being kids. But he forced himself to stay present, to really look at his daughter's face and see the hurt there. "I'm sorry you had to hear that," he said, his throat tight. "That must have been really hard." Sarah nodded, and tears welled up in her eyes. Without thinking, Clint opened his arms, and she crawled into his embrace, something she hadn't done in months. She felt so small against his chest, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. "You know what?" he murmured into her hair. "Jamie doesn't know anything about our family. And being different, well, sometimes different just means we've been through more, makes us stronger." They sat like that for a while, until Sarah's breathing steadied. When she pulled back, wiping her eyes with her pajama sleeve, some of the tension had left her small frame. "Time for bed?" Clint asked, and she nodded. In her bedroom, decorated with the solar system mobile they'd built together last summer, Sarah climbed under her constellation-covered comforter. Clint tucked the edges around her, a routine they'd maintained since she was tiny. "Dad?" Sarah's voice was sleepy now, but clearer than before. "Yeah?" "Where were you today? After work?" Clint paused, considering his answer. "I was talking to someone. Someone who helps people figure things out when their thoughts get too jumbled up." Sarah seemed to process this. "Like a teacher for grown-ups?" "Something like that," he said, managing a small smile. He leaned down and kissed her forehead, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Good night, sweetheart." "Good night, Dad." Standing in the doorway, Clint watched as Sarah's eyes drifted closed. The nightlight cast star-shaped patterns on her walls, and for a moment he was overwhelmed by how much he loved her, and how terrified he was of failing her. Back in the living room, he sank into his armchair and pulled out his phone. The screen showed 9:47 p.m. His next appointment with Emma was scheduled for Friday, 3 days away. Part of him wanted to cancel it, to retreat back into familiar patterns. But Sarah's tears were still fresh in his mind, and Emma's words rang true. He had paid with his service, but his daughter was paying too, paying for his silence, his distance, his unhealed wounds. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window, casting long shadows across the worn wooden table where Clint sat. His coffee mug warmed his hands as he stared into its dark depths, still trying to process his therapy session from the day before. The quiet of the house felt different now, less like the comfortable silence he'd grown used to and more like something that needed to be filled. Sarah had already left for school, her cereal bowl still in the sink. He'd watched her walk to the bus stop earlier, her backpack seeming too heavy for her small frame. Something had been off about her lately, but he couldn't put his finger on what. The sharp ring of his phone cut through his thoughts. The screen displayed Riverside Elementary, and his stomach tightened. He answered, his voice rough from disuse. "Hello? Mr. Rhodes? This is Mrs. Bennett, the school counselor." Her voice was gentle, but carried a note of concern that made Clint sit up straighter. "I wanted to discuss something regarding Sarah." Clint's hand tightened around his coffee mug. "Is she okay?" "Physically, yes. But..." Mrs. Bennett paused. "We've noticed some concerning behavior from other students. Sarah's been experiencing some bullying. Some children have been calling her names and excluding her from activities because she's what they call a war kid." The words hit Clint like a physical blow. His coffee turned bitter in his mouth, and he set the mug down with trembling hands. What exactly are they saying to her? They've been making comments about her father being in the military, suggesting that makes her different or somehow dangerous. Mrs. Bennett's voice softened. One student even said their parents told them to stay away from her because she might be messed up like other military kids. Clint's jaw clenched. His free hand curled into a fist on the table. This was his fault. His service, his PTSD, his struggles, they were affecting Sarah in ways he'd never imagined. The weight of it pressed down on his chest until he could barely breathe. "Mr. Rhodes? Mrs. Bennett prompted when he remained silent. "What?" He cleared his throat. "What can we do about this? We're addressing it with the students and their parents," she assured him. "But I wanted to let you know so you could talk with Sarah. She hasn't opened up to me about it, but I can tell it's affecting her." After hanging up, Clint sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The morning light had shifted. His coffee had gone cold, but he barely noticed. His mind raced with memories of Sarah's recent behavior, her quieter demeanor, the way she'd stopped talking about her friends, how she seemed to shrink into herself when he picked her up from school. How had he missed the signs? He was supposed to protect her, to keep her safe. Instead, his very identity as a veteran was causing her pain. The irony felt like a cruel joke. He'd gone to war to protect people, and now his service was hurting the person he loved most. The workday passed in a blur. Clint moved through his tasks at the construction site mechanically, his mind constantly drifting to Sarah. His coworkers noticed his distraction, but they knew better than to ask. The afternoon couldn't come fast enough. When he pulled up to the school, Sarah was waiting on the bench near the pickup area. Her small figure looked even tinier than usual, hunched over as if trying to make herself invisible. She climbed into the truck without a word, her eyes fixed on her shoes. "Hey, sweetie," Clint said softly, watching her in the rearview mirror. "How was your day?" Sarah shrugged, clutching her backpack to her chest like a shield. "Fine." The single word held so much weight, so much unspoken pain. Clint's hands tightened on the steering wheel as they pulled away from the school. He wanted to reach out, to tell her everything would be okay, but the words felt hollow in his throat. What could he say? How could he fix this? The drive home was filled with silence, broken only by the soft hum of the engine and the occasional click of the turn signal. Every few minutes, Clint would glance in the rearview mirror, hoping to catch Sarah's eye, but she remained focused on her lap, her long brown hair falling forward to hide her face. His heart ached with the need to protect her, to make this better somehow. But he felt helpless. The same helplessness he'd felt in therapy yesterday, the same helplessness that haunted his dreams of war. This was a different kind of battle. One he couldn't fight with the skills he'd learned as a soldier. As they turned onto their street, Clint realized that for all his training, for all his experience in combat, nothing had prepared him for this moment. Nothing had taught him how to shield his daughter from the consequences of his service, how to help her navigate a world that sometimes seemed determined to make her feel different and alone. Traffic lights reflected off the windshield, casting red and green shadows across Sarah's downturned face. In that moment, Clint saw both her strength and her vulnerability, so much like his own. She was fighting her own battles, carrying burdens no child should have to bear, and he didn't know how to lighten her load. But as they pulled into their driveway, one thing became crystal clear. He had to try. He couldn't let his own fears and inadequacies stop him from being the father Sarah needed. He might not have all the answers, might not know exactly how to fix this, but he had to do something, anything. Clint watched Sarah from the doorway of their living room. She sat cross-legged on the carpet, surrounded by her favorite stuffed animals, but something was different. Her usual bright smile seemed dimmer, her movements less energetic. Even when she made her teddy bear dance, her giggles sounded hollow, like echoes in an empty room. He sank into his worn leather armchair, the one he'd bought years ago when they first moved in. The familiar creaks of the leather usually brought comfort, but today they just reminded him of how tired he felt. The afternoon sun filtered through the curtains, casting long shadows across the room, matching his dark mood. "Hey, sweetheart." he called out softly. "How about we order pizza tonight?" Sarah looked up, her brown eyes meeting his briefly, before darting away. "Okay, Dad. Just okay. No excitement, no suggestions for toppings, no playful bargaining for extra cheese." The distance between them felt like a canyon, growing wider with each passing moment. Clint's chest tightened as he remembered the school counselor's words from that morning. War kid, they'd called her. His service, his struggles, were now becoming her burden to bear. He pulled out his phone, checking the time. His next session with Dr. Harris was tomorrow afternoon. The thought made his stomach knot up. What would he say? How could he explain that his own daughter was suffering because of him? The therapy sessions felt like both a lifeline and a weight around his neck. Sarah moved her teddy bear in small circles, her movements mechanical. "Dad?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, honey? Can I eat in my room today?" The request hit him like a physical blow. Sarah had always insisted on eating together, even when he'd suggested otherwise during his darker days. Now she wanted to retreat, just like he always did. He was teaching her all the wrong lessons. "How about we eat at the coffee table?" he suggested, trying to find middle ground. "We could watch that show you like, the one with the dancing penguins." Sarah shrugged, a gesture that looked too old for her young shoulders. "Maybe." Clint ran his hands through his hair, fighting the urge to retreat into silence himself. The walls of their home seemed to close in, filled with all the words they weren't saying. His next therapy session couldn't come soon enough, yet he dreaded it with every fiber of his being. The night passed in a blur of half-eaten pizza and forced small talk. When morning came, Clint found himself sitting once again in Dr. Harris's office, the familiar smell of coffee and old books doing little to calm his nerves. Emma sat across from him, her presence steady and patient. She wore a deep blue cardigan today, and her reading glasses hung from a chain around her neck. The ticking of the wall clock seemed louder than usual, as Clint struggled to find his words. "Sarah's being bullied," he finally said, his voice rough. "Because of me. Because she's a war kid." Emma leaned forward slightly, her expression concerned but not pitying. "Tell me more about that, Clint." The words started spilling out, like water through a broken dam. "The school called yesterday. Some kids have been. They've been giving her a hard time, saying things about soldiers, about me. She's so quiet now, Dr. Harris. She barely talks to me anymore." "She used to." He swallowed hard. "She used to tell me everything. And how does that make you feel?" Emma's question was gentle but direct. Clint's hands clenched into fists on his knees, angry, helpless. "I'm supposed to protect her, but I can't even do that right. I'm the reason she's hurting in the first place." "Are you?" Emma's question hung in the air between them. "If I hadn't," Clint started, then stopped. "If I was better at dealing with everything, maybe she wouldn't be struggling so much. Maybe I wouldn't be passing my problems on to her." Emma was quiet for a moment, letting his words settle. "Clint, healing isn't a one-time fix," she said finally, her voice firm but kind. "It's not something you can rush through to get to some perfect endpoint. You need to be there for her, even if you don't feel like you're enough. She needs to see you try." Clint nodded, but the doubt churned in his stomach. Being there, really being there. It meant facing his own demons head-on. It meant being vulnerable, in ways that terrified him. His military training had taught him how to face external threats, but this internal battle felt impossible to win. "I don't know if I can," he admitted, his voice barely audible. Emma's eyes held his steadily. "That's exactly why you're here, Clint. And that's exactly why you can." The words hit home, but they also scared him. The path ahead seemed darker and more uncertain than ever, even as he knew it was the only way forward. For Sarah, for himself. But knowing the way and walking it were two very different things. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the front yard as Clint settled into the wooden rocking chair on his porch. A gentle breeze carried the sweet scent of freshly cut grass, And for the first time in what felt like forever, his mind wasn't racing with worry. Sarah sat in the yard, her dolls spread out on a worn checkered blanket she'd insisted on bringing outside. Emma's words from their last session echoed in his mind. "She needs to see you try." The phrase had been bouncing around in his head for days, like a song he couldn't shake. Watching Sarah now, her dark hair catching the sunlight as she carefully arranged her dolls, Clint felt a flicker of hope. Maybe he could be the father she deserved. Sarah picked up one of her dolls, a cloth one with yarn for hair, and began brushing it with careful, deliberate strokes. The sight reminded him of how her mother used to brush Sarah's hair every morning before school. The memory didn't sting as much as it usually did. "What are you doing there, sweetheart?" Clint called out, his voice softer than usual. Sarah looked up, surprise flickering across her face. "Having a tea party," she said after a moment's hesitation. "Miss Lucy needs her hair done first, though." She held up the doll with the yarn hair. Clint nodded, watching as she returned to her task. The simple exchange felt like a small victory. A week ago, she might have just shrugged and turned away. The rocking chair creaked beneath him as he shifted his weight, its familiar sound matching the rhythm of his thoughts. He could do this. He could be present for her, even when it felt impossible. Even when the memories of war threatened to drag him back into darkness. Even when his own fears of inadequacy wrapped around his throat like a vice. Sarah arranged her dolls in a circle, placing tiny plastic teacups in front of each one. Her movements were precise, careful, just like her mother's had been. The thought brought a sad smile to Clint's face. "Would you like some tea, Dad?" Sarah's voice pulled him from his thoughts. For a moment, Clint froze. It was such a simple question, but it felt monumental. "I'd love some," he managed to say, his voice rougher than he intended. Sarah's face lit up with a smile that made his heart ache. She poured imaginary tea into one of the tiny cups and stood up, carrying it to him with exaggerated care. Her small feet padded across the grass, and Clint found himself holding his breath. "It's raspberry tea," she informed him seriously. "Your favorite." Clint accepted the plastic cup with equal seriousness, pretending to sip from it. "Perfect temperature," he said, and Sarah beamed. The moment stretched between them like a bridge, fragile but real. Clint wanted to freeze it, to hold on to this feeling of connection, but the familiar voice of doubt crept in, whispering that he'd fail her again, that he wasn't equipped to handle what lay ahead. Sarah returned to her tea party, humming softly to herself. The sound reminded him of peaceful moments before the war, before everything had changed, back when he thought he knew what kind of father he'd be. The ringing of his phone shattered the tranquil scene. Sarah's shoulders tensed at the sound, and Clint's stomach twisted as he recognized the school's number on the screen. "Mr. Rhodes?" The school secretary's voice was hesitant. "This is Mrs. Martinez from Valley Elementary." Clint's grip tightened on the phone. "Yes, what can I do for you?" "There's been another incident with Sarah today." She paused, and Clint could hear papers shuffling in the background. "The bullying situation has escalated. Sarah was found crying in the bathroom during recess. She's refusing to come to school tomorrow." Clint's jaw clenched as he watched Sarah with her dolls, her earlier smile now gone. She must have sensed the change in his mood because she began packing up her tea set with quick, nervous movements. "What happened exactly?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Some children were making comments about." Mrs. Martinez hesitated. "About her being a war kid again. They've been excluding her from games and spreading unkind rumors. We've addressed it with the other students' parents, but what?" Clint's voice came out sharper than he intended. "Sarah's becoming increasingly withdrawn. Her teacher is concerned about her emotional well-being." The peaceful moment from earlier felt like a distant dream now. Sarah had finished packing her toys and was standing by the front door, waiting to go inside, her small shoulders hunched. "I understand," Clint said, though he felt anything but understanding. "I'll talk to her about it in the morning." After ending the call, Clint sat there for a moment, watching as the sun dipped lower on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Sarah stood by the door, clutching her tea set to her chest, waiting for him to make the next move. Ready to go in, sweetheart? He asked, standing up from the rocking chair. Sarah nodded, her eyes fixed on the ground. As Clint opened the door for her, he caught a glimpse of her face in the fading light. The sight of unshed tears in her eyes made his chest tighten. Inside, Sarah immediately headed for her room, her footsteps quick and light on the stairs. Clint watched her go, feeling the weight of his promise to talk about it tomorrow. Through the window, he could see the last rays of sunlight disappearing behind the houses across the street. The darkness settling over the neighborhood matched his mood, but underneath the familiar feeling of helplessness, something else was growing. The familiar scent of lavender and the soft hum of the white noise machine greeted Clint as he settled into the worn leather armchair in Emma's office. Afternoon light filtered through the gauzy curtains, casting a gentle glow across the room. He twisted his hands in his lap, his shoulders tense beneath his faded denim jacket. "How has this week been with Sarah?" Emma asked, her voice carrying its usual calm warmth. Clint let out a heavy breath. "Not great. She still doesn't want to go to school. I tried talking to her about it, but..." He shrugged, the gesture carrying the weight of his helplessness. "I don't know what to say. Every time I try, I just freeze up." Emma nodded, her pen moving quietly across her notepad. "That freezing up? Can you tell me more about what happens in those moments?" "It's like..." Clint paused, searching for the right words. "Like I'm back there sometimes. Not in the war exactly, but in that same feeling of not being able to protect someone, of failing." His voice grew quieter. "Sarah needs me to be strong, to have answers, but I can't even handle a conversation about school bullies without..." He clenched his jaw, looking away. "Clint," Emma said gently, "what you're describing is a common response to trauma. Your PTSD isn't just about the memories of war. It affects how you handle stress now, especially when it comes to protecting those you love." The clock on the wall ticked steadily as Clint absorbed her words. Outside, a car horn honked, making him flinch slightly. "I've been thinking about your situation," Emma continued, leaning forward slightly in her chair. "There's a program I want to tell you about. It's called Warriors to Mentors. They work with veterans who volunteer to help troubled youth." Clint's eyebrows drew together. "I don't see how that would help." "Sometimes," Emma explained, "the best way to heal ourselves is by helping others. These kids, many of them come from difficult backgrounds. They need someone who understands what it's like to feel lost, to feel different." "I can barely help my own daughter," Clint said, his voice rough. "How could I possibly help someone else's kid?" Emma set her notepad aside. "That's exactly why I think this could be beneficial. Working with these young people might help you understand Sarah better. More importantly, it might help you understand yourself." Clint shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I don't know." "The program meets twice a week at the community center," Emma continued. "Most of the kids there are dealing with anger issues, family problems, or trauma of their own. They need someone who won't judge them, who can show them there's hope." "Hope?" Clint let out a bitter laugh. "I'm not exactly the poster child for hope, Doc. Aren't you?" Emma challenged gently. "You're here, aren't you? Despite everything you've been through, you're trying to be better for your daughter. That takes courage, Clint. That is hope." The words hit him hard, making his throat tight. He looked down at his hands, noticing how tightly he'd been gripping the armrests. "These kids," Emma went on, her voice softer now, "they're not looking for someone perfect. They're looking for someone real. Someone who understands what it's like to struggle but keeps going anyway." Clint stood up suddenly, walking to the window. The street below was busy with afternoon traffic, people going about their normal lives. "What if I make things worse? What if I..." He trailed off, the fear too heavy to voice. "What if you make a difference?" Emma countered. "What if helping these kids helps you find the words you need with Sarah?" He stood there for a long moment, watching the world outside. The thought of working with troubled kids made his stomach churn. They'd remind him too much of himself, of all the darkness he carried. But something about Emma's words wouldn't let him dismiss the idea entirely. "I don't have to decide right now, do I?" he finally asked, turning back to face her. Emma shook her head. "No, you don't. But I'd like you to think about it. Sometimes the things that scare us most are exactly what we need to face. The rest of the session passed in a blur of discussion about coping techniques and breathing exercises. But Clint's mind kept circling back to the mentoring program. As he gathered his jacket to leave, Emma handed him a small business card with the program details. "Just think about it," she said. "That's all I'm asking." Clint nodded, slipping the card into his pocket. It felt like it weighed 100 pounds. He stepped out of her office and into the hallway, his thoughts a tangled mess of fear and possibility. The idea of mentoring troubled kids terrified him. What if he triggered in front of them? What if his own issues made their problems worse? But as he walked to his truck, he couldn't shake the image of those kids, probably feeling as lost and angry as he had felt when he first came home from war. Maybe as lost as Sarah felt now. The card in his pocket seemed to burn against his leg, a constant reminder of a choice he wasn't sure he was ready to make. Standing in the parking lot, Clint pulled out the card and stared at it. The simple black text offered no answers, just a possibility, a chance to maybe make something good out of all the pain he carried. He wasn't sure if he was ready, but the thought wouldn't leave him alone. Maybe that's what hope felt like. Terrifying and necessary all at once. The Veterans Youth Center stood weathered against the gray sky. Clint sat in his truck, watching teenagers filter through doors, some laughing, others shuffling with hunched shoulders. His stomach churned. "You've faced worse," he muttered, but his hands trembled, pulling the keys. Noise hit him immediately. Teenage voices, squeaking sneakers, distant basketball thuds. Industrial cleaning supplies reminded him of high school. A short woman with graying hair approached, clipboard ready. "Clint Rhodes? I'm Margaret, program coordinator." "Yes, ma'am." "Just Margaret." She smiled. "Come on, I'll show you around." They walked past motivational posters and student artwork. Teenagers gave curious glances or ignored him entirely. His combat instincts noted exits, cover spots, movement patterns, old habits. Most kids come from challenging backgrounds, Margaret explained. Broken homes, poverty, trauma, some legal trouble. Good kids, though, just need someone to believe. Clint nodded, throat tight. He understood too well. The main room held mismatched furniture, computers, round tables where kids gathered. Some did homework, others played games. The noise made Clint's shoulders tense. "Overwhelming at first," Margaret said, noticing his discomfort. A crash across the room, an overturned chair, arguing boys. Margaret sighed, but wasn't alarmed. "That's Jeremy." She indicated a lanky teen watching with apparent disinterest. Black hoodie despite the warm room, dark hair over his eyes. "Your mentee." Clint studied the boy's carefully maintained distance, learned wariness. He recognized that stance. He'd worn it once. 16. Father's absent, mother has issues. Bright but slipping grades. Fighting at school. "Why me?" Clint asked roughly. "Sometimes those who've walked through darkness can guide others back to light." She gestured Jeremy over. The teenager approached slowly, hands pocketed. Up close, Clint saw shadows under his eyes, jaw tension. "Jeremy, this is Mr. Rhodes, your mentor." Jeremy's eyes assessed Clint. "Whatever." "Marine?" Jeremy asked suddenly. "Army." Jeremy's lip curled. "Great. Another soldier trying to save me." Margaret cleared her throat. "Quiet room down the hall?" The small office had 2 chairs and a parking lot view. Jeremy dropped down, pulling out his phone. Silence stretched uncomfortably. "Margaret says you're having school trouble." Clint started. "Margaret talks too much," Jeremy replied without looking up. Clint recognized the fortress-high walls. Defensive anger. Like looking in a 25-year-old mirror. "I'm not here to save or fix you. Just talk, if you want." Jeremy looked up, eyes hard. "What if I don't?" "Then we sit in silence." "Your choice." Surprise flickered across Jeremy's face at not being pushed. He returned to his phone. Posture slightly less. Defensive. Minutes passed. Clint thought of Sarah, wondering if she'd become this angry, withdrawn. His chest ached. "How long do we have to do this?" Jeremy asked quietly. 12 weeks. But Margaret can find someone else if you hate it, Jeremy snorted. Yeah, 'cause that's worked before. He stood abruptly. I get it. Your good deed. But I don't need another adult telling me how to fix my life. Clint stayed seated, voice steady. Never said I'd fix anything. Hell, I'm still figuring out my own life. Jeremy hesitated, hand on doorknob. Same time next week? Finally, Jeremy shrugged. Whatever. Less dismissive, more agreement. After Jeremy left, doubt crept in. What was he thinking? Mentoring a troubled kid when he could barely handle his own problems. Emma's voice about healing through helping echoed, but he felt overwhelmed. Margaret appeared. How'd it go? He agreed to come back, I think. She smiled. Better than usual. Don't let his attitude fool you. Staying the whole session means something. Clint nodded, uncertainty gnawing. He'd faced enemy fire with more confidence. Walking to his truck, he couldn't shake the feeling he might be making a huge mistake. The youth center's basketball court echoed with the sound of bouncing balls and squeaking sneakers. Clint stood at the sidelines, watching Jeremy practice free throws. 3 weeks had passed since their first awkward meeting, and something was different today. Jeremy's usual scowl had softened into concentration as he lined up his shots. You're dropping your elbow, Clint called out, keeping his voice casual. A month ago, such advice would have earned him an eye roll, or worse. Today, Jeremy adjusted his stance without complaint. The ball arced smoothly through the air and swished through the net. A small smile tugged at the corner of Jeremy's mouth. Like that? Jeremy asked, glancing over his shoulder. Much better. Clint nodded, surprised by the hint of pride in his own voice. You've got good form when you focus. Sarah sat cross-legged on the nearby bleachers, her homework spread across her lap. She'd been joining Clint at the center twice a week, claiming the change of scenery helped her concentrate. But Clint often caught her watching the interactions between the mentors and teens, her eyes bright with curiosity. Jeremy retrieved the ball and walked over to where Clint stood. You played much? You know, before. Before the military? Clint finished for him. It was the first time Jeremy had broached the subject directly. Yeah, I played in high school. Nothing special, but I loved the game. Did you? Jeremy hesitated, spinning the ball in his hands. Did you see a lot of action? Over there? The question hung in the air between them. Clint noticed Sarah had stopped pretending to do her homework, her pencil frozen mid-equation. I did, Clint answered carefully. It wasn't easy, but I had good people watching my back. Jeremy nodded slowly, his fingers tracing the ball's seams. My dad was in the service too. At least, that's what Mom says. He left before I was born. The words came out matter of fact, but Clint recognized the pain beneath them. It was the same hurt he sometimes heard in Sarah's voice when she talked about her mother. That must have been tough, Clint said softly. Jeremy shrugged, but his shoulders were tense. Whatever. I don't need him anyway. No, you don't, Clint agreed, surprising himself with his directness. But it's okay to be angry about it. Jeremy's hands stilled on the ball. For a moment, Clint thought he'd pushed too far, but then Jeremy spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. Sometimes I wonder if he ever thinks about me, if he knows I exist. Jeremy's words carried the weight of years of unspoken thoughts. Mom says he was messed up after coming home. That's why he left. Clint felt a familiar ache in his chest. How many times had he worried about passing his own trauma on to Sarah? Listen, Clint said, choosing his words carefully. What your father did, leaving you and your mom, that's on him, not you. Sometimes people run from their problems instead of facing them. It's not right, but it happens. Jeremy looked up, his eyes searching Clint's face. Is that why you're here, facing your problems? The question caught Clint off guard. He glanced at Sarah, who was watching them intently, and found himself nodding. Yeah, I guess I am. Trying to, anyway. He managed a small smile. Some days are harder than others. Jeremy dribbled the ball slowly, thoughtfully. I get that. Most days, I just want to punch something, you know. But, he paused, looking around the gym. Being here helps, sometimes. Yeah. Clint agreed. Sometimes that's enough. They spent the next hour running drills, the conversation lighter but somehow deeper. Jeremy shared stories about school, his struggles with math, and a girl in his English class who actually laughed at his jokes. Clint listened, offering advice when asked, but mostly just being present. As the session wound down, other teens began filtering out of the gym. Jeremy lingered, helping to collect the basketballs. "Hey, Mr. Rhodes?" Jeremy called as he headed toward the door. "Thanks. For not giving up on me, I mean." Before Clint could respond, Jeremy was gone, the gym door swinging shut behind him. Clint stood there, feeling something shift inside him, a warmth he hadn't experienced in a long time. Sarah appeared at his side, her backpack slung over one shoulder. "That was really nice, what you said to Jeremy." "You think so?" Clint asked, gathering her scattered homework papers. "Yeah," Sarah nodded firmly. "You didn't try to fix everything. You just listened. Like you do with me when I'm sad about Mom." Clint's throat tightened. He hadn't realized Sarah had noticed those moments. As they walked through the parking lot, Sarah reached for his hand, something she hadn't done in months. "I think you're helping them." "Dad, just like you helped me." The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the youth center's basketball court. Clint watched as Jeremy worked with a younger boy named Marcus on his dribbling skills. The familiar squeak of sneakers against polished wood filled the air, along with the steady rhythm of bouncing balls and children's laughter. "Keep your head up when you dribble," Jeremy instructed Marcus, demonstrating the proper technique. "That way, you can see what's coming." Clint smiled, remembering how sullen Jeremy had been just weeks ago. Now here he was, passing on what he'd learned to someone else. The transformation, though small, felt significant. Sarah sat on the bleachers nearby, her homework spread across her lap. She'd taken to coming with him to these sessions, saying she liked watching him help the kids. Sometimes she'd join in the activities, but today she seemed content to observe while working on her math problems. The peaceful scene shattered when Marcus lost control of the ball. It bounced hard against the wall with a sharp, explosive crack that echoed through the gymnasium. The sound hit Clint like a physical blow. His muscles tensed, and suddenly, he wasn't in the youth center anymore. The fluorescent lights became the harsh Middle Eastern sun. The wooden court transformed into dusty streets. The echo of the ball morphed into something far more dangerous, far more deadly. His heart hammered against his ribs. Sweat beaded on his forehead as his breath came in short, sharp gasps. The walls seemed to close in, and the cheerful sounds of children playing warped into something dark and threatening. "Mr. Rhodes?" Jeremy's voice seemed to come from very far away. "You okay?" Clint forced himself to nod, but his mouth had gone dry. His hands trembled as he gripped the edge of the nearby bench, trying to ground himself in the present moment. The memories pressed in, vivid and overwhelming. The taste of sand in his mouth, the weight of his gear, the sound of Dad. Sarah's worried voice cut through the fog. She stood a few feet away, her math book clutched to her chest, eyes wide with concern. Clint wanted to reassure her, to tell her everything was fine, but the words wouldn't come. "I need some air," he managed to say, his voice rough. He turned and walked quickly toward the exit, trying to keep his pace steady, even though every instinct screamed at him to run. The cool evening air hit his face as he stepped outside. He leaned against the brick wall, closing his eyes, focusing on his breathing the way Emma had taught him. In for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 4. But the memories kept intruding, fragments of things he tried so hard to forget. "Mr. Rhodes?" It was Jeremy again, hovering uncertainly in the doorway. "Should I get someone?" "No," Clint said quickly, straightening up. "No, I'm fine. Just needed a break. Why don't you wrap up with Marcus for today?" Jeremy nodded slowly, clearly unconvinced, but willing to give him space. As the door closed behind him, Clint heard him telling Sarah everything was okay, that her dad just needed a minute. The drive home was quiet. Sarah kept sneaking worried glances at him, but she didn't ask questions. The silence felt heavy, loaded with all the things Clint couldn't bring himself to say. At home, he went through the motions of their evening routine mechanically. He helped Sarah with her remaining homework, made dinner, and cleaned up afterward. But he felt disconnected from it all, like he was watching someone else go through these familiar motions. After Sarah went upstairs to get ready for bed, Clint sat in the dark living room. The only light came from the street lamp outside, casting strange shadows on the walls. His hands still trembled slightly when he lifted them, and the echoes of memories continued to ripple through his mind. He heard Sarah's soft footsteps on the stairs before he saw her. She padded into the living room in her favorite pink pajamas, her hair still damp from her shower. "Dad?" Her voice was small but determined. "What's wrong?" "Nothing, sweetheart," Clint said automatically, trying to inject warmth into his voice. "Just tired. You should be in bed." Sarah didn't move. Instead, she took a step closer, her face serious in the dim light. "You're not okay," she said. It wasn't a question. "Sarah," he started, but she cut him off by closing the distance between them and wrapping her arms around his neck in a tight hug. The simple gesture caught him off guard. For a moment, he sat frozen, overwhelmed by the unconditional love in that embrace. Then, slowly, his arms came up to hold her close. His rigid posture softened, and he felt some of the tension leave his body as he buried his face in her hair. They stayed like that for a long moment, father and daughter, in the quiet darkness. Clint felt the walls he'd built around his emotions begin to crack, just a little. A single tear slid down his cheek, but for once, he didn't try to hide it. Sarah didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. Her presence was enough, her quiet strength supporting him in a way that words never could. In that moment, Clint realized that maybe he didn't have to be the strong one all the time. Maybe sometimes it was okay to let his little girl be strong for him. The sounds of children playing at the youth center felt distant and muffled to Clint as he sat on a folding chair against the wall. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped his coffee cup, the bitter liquid inside long since gone cold. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed incessantly, reminding him of the constant drone of generators in the field. Jeremy approached him with concern in his eyes. "You okay, Mr. Rhodes?" "You've been pretty quiet today." Clint forced a tight smile. "I'm fine. Just tired." The lie tasted sour in his mouth. The truth was, he hadn't slept properly in days. Every time he closed his eyes, the memories came flooding back. The explosions, the screams, the weight of responsibility crushing him. He'd thought he had it under control, but lately, everything seemed to be unraveling. "Dad?" Sarah's voice cut through his thoughts. She stood before him, clutching her homework. "Can you help me with my math?" "Not now, Sarah," he snapped, immediately regretting his harsh tone when he saw her face fall. "I mean, just give me a minute, okay?" Sarah retreated without a word, her shoulders slumped. Clint watched her go, guilt gnawing at his insides. He'd been doing that more often lately, pushing her away, shutting down when she needed him most. The next day at Emma's office, the familiar calming blue walls felt more like they were closing in on him. Emma sat in her usual chair, her notepad balanced on her knee, watching him with careful eyes. "You've missed 2 volunteer sessions this week," she said gently. "Want to talk about what's going on?" Clint shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Nothing's going on. Just busy." "Clint." Emma's voice was firm but kind. "We've made too much progress for you to start building those walls again. What changed?" He stared at his hands, rough and calloused. "I keep seeing things, hearing things, like I'm back there." The words came out barely above a whisper. "The other day at the center, one of the kids dropped a basketball hard on the floor and He swallowed hard. For a second, I wasn't there anymore. I was back in that convoy, and the sounds." Emma leaned forward slightly. "That must have been frightening." "Frightening?" Clint let out a bitter laugh. "It's terrifying. What if next time I react? What if I scare those kids? What if I scare Sarah?" His voice cracked on his daughter's name. "You're not going to hurt anyone, Clint. You're experiencing a natural response to trauma. But pulling away from the things that have been helping you, the volunteer work, your relationship with Sarah, that's not the answer. Then what is? The question came out more desperate than he intended. "Because I feel like I'm drowning here, Emma. Every time I think I'm getting better, something pulls me back under." The answer is to keep going, Emma said firmly. To acknowledge these feelings instead of running from them. To let Sarah see that it's okay to struggle sometimes. Clint shook his head. She needs me to be strong. She needs you to be real, Emma corrected. She's not looking for perfection, Clint. She's looking for connection. The truth of Emma's words hit him hard. He thought about all the times Sarah had tried to reach out lately, asking about his day, showing him her drawings, seeking his help with homework, and how he'd pushed her away each time, thinking he was protecting her from his darkness. I'm failing her, he whispered, the admission painful but necessary. No, Emma said softly. You're trying. And that matters more than you know. But you need to let her in, Clint. She's stronger than you think. The session continued, with Emma pushing him to confront the fears he'd been avoiding. By the end, Clint felt emotionally drained but somehow lighter, as if naming his fears had taken away some of their power. The drive home was quiet, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Clint's mind wandered back to Emma's words about letting Sarah in. He'd been so focused on being the perfect father that he'd forgotten how to just be present. When he pulled into the driveway, the house lights were on, casting a warm glow through the windows. He sat in the car for a moment, gathering his courage. The weight of failure still pressed heavily on his chest, but something else stirred beneath it, a determination to do better. Walking into the kitchen, he found Sarah at the table, surrounded by colored pencils and paper. She looked up as he entered, her face brightening slightly before uncertainty crept in. The sight of her hesitation cut deep into his heart. What are you working on, sweetheart? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Sarah picked up her drawing and held it out to him. The page showed two figures standing together, clearly meant to be him and Sarah watching a vibrant sunset. The details were simple but touching. She'd drawn his military posture, the way he stood straight and tall, and beside him, her smaller figure held his hand. Clint's throat tightened as he looked at the drawing. Despite everything, his withdrawal, his fear, his struggles, she still saw them together, still wanted to be close to him. The realization hit him like a physical blow. While he'd been trying to protect her from his brokenness, she'd been trying to show him that she accepted him exactly as he was. His hands shook slightly as he held the drawing, emotions threatening to overwhelm him. This was what Emma had been trying to tell him, that pushing people away wasn't protecting them, it was hurting them. And here was Sarah, still reaching out, still hoping, still believing in him even when he struggled to believe in himself. The youth center's worn basketball court squeaked under Clint's boots as he made his way inside. Afternoon light filtered through the high windows, casting long shadows across the scuffed floor. His chest felt tight, but he forced himself to keep walking, one foot in front of the other. Jeremy was already there, dribbling a basketball with impressive control. The steady thump-thump-thump echoed through the gymnasium, a rhythm that somehow helped steady Clint's nerves. The teenager's face lit up when he spotted Clint, though he tried to hide it behind his usual cool demeanor. Thought you might not show up today, Jeremy said, catching the ball and tucking it under his arm. I made a commitment, Clint replied, his voice stronger than he expected. Besides, I heard you aced that math test. A hint of pride crossed Jeremy's face. Yeah, well, those study tips you gave me actually helped. Who knew taking breaks could make you study better? Clint managed a genuine smile. Military taught me that. Sometimes you need to pace yourself to win the long game. They moved to their usual spot, a quiet corner with two chairs near the equipment room. The familiar setting helped ease some of Clint's anxiety. He noticed Jeremy had brought his backpack today, something he rarely did before. I've been thinking about what you said, Jeremy began, unzipping his bag, about how sometimes the hardest battles are the ones we fight with ourselves. Clint's throat tightened. Those words, he'd spoken them during their last session, before his flashback, before everything started feeling like it was falling apart again. Jeremy pulled out a notebook. Its edges worn, but the pages clearly filled with recent writing. I started keeping a journal. Like you suggested, it's helping. You know, with the anger and stuff. The simple admission hit Clint like a physical force. Here was this kid, taking steps to better himself, using tools Clint had shared. Despite all his doubts and fears, he'd managed to make a real difference in someone's life. "That's really good, Jeremy. Really good." Clint's voice was rough with emotion. They spent the next hour talking about Jeremy's progress in school, his struggles at home, and his hopes for the future. The conversation flowed naturally, punctuated by the distant sounds of other kids playing basketball and the occasional burst of laughter from across the gym. "My mom." Jeremy hesitated, picking at a loose thread on his jeans. "She's been trying harder lately, going to meetings and stuff. But sometimes I'm still scared she'll relapse, you know?" Clint nodded, understanding all too well the fear of falling back into old patterns. "It takes courage to keep trying, even when you're scared. That goes for her, and for you too." "Yeah?" Jeremy looked up, his eyes searching Clint's face. "Sometimes it feels like I'm the only one dealing with this stuff." "You're not," Clint assured him. "Everyone's fighting their own battles. The trick is learning you don't have to fight them alone." As their session wrapped up, Clint felt something shift inside him. The darkness was still there, but it didn't feel as overwhelming. Watching Jeremy pack up his things, seeing the careful way he handled his journal, Clint recognized the importance of what they were doing here. "Hey, Jeremy," Clint called out as the teenager headed for the door. "Would it be okay if I reached out to your mom? Maybe we could set up a meeting, talk about ways to support you both?" Jeremy paused, surprise evident on his face. Then, slowly, he nodded. Yeah, that'd be cool." After Jeremy left, Clint decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the sidewalk, and a cool breeze carried the scent of approaching autumn. He pulled out his phone and found the contact information for Jeremy's family that the center had provided. His thumb hovered over the number for a moment. This was more than just mentoring. This was choosing to be involved in someone else's struggle, to share their burden. It reminded him of Sarah, of all the times he should have reached out for help, but didn't. Clint took a deep breath and pressed the call button. As the phone rang, he felt the weight of responsibility settle over him. Not as a burden this time, but as a purpose. He might not be able to fix everything, but he could be there. He could try. The voice that answered was tired but hopeful, much like Jeremy's mom herself. As Clint introduced himself and explained why he was calling, he felt something inside him strengthen. This was a small step, but it was in the right direction. For Jeremy, for Sarah, and for himself. The youth center's worn basketball court squeaked under Clint's boots as he made his way inside. Afternoon light filtered through the high windows, casting long shadows across the scuffed floor. His chest felt tight, but he forced himself to keep walking, one foot in front of the other. Mrs. Martinez, the center's coordinator, rushed toward him with worry etched on her face. "Clint, thank goodness you're here." Her voice trembled slightly. "Jeremy didn't show up today. His mother called. There was a huge fight with his father last night. He's gone." The words hit Clint like a physical blow. His throat went dry, and his hands began to shake. "Gone? What do you mean gone?" "He packed a bag and left. His mother found his room empty this morning." Mrs. Martinez wrung her hands. "The police have been notified," but Clint's mind raced through his last conversation with Jeremy. The kid had seemed quieter than usual, more withdrawn. How had he missed the signs? The weight of guilt pressed down on his shoulders, making it hard to breathe. "Did he say anything to you?" Mrs. Martinez asked. "Any hint where he might go?" Clint shook his head, remembering Jeremy's haunted expression when he'd talked about his father. The boy had been carrying so much pain, and Clint had seen it. He'd recognized it, because it mirrored his own. But he hadn't pushed hard enough, hadn't done enough. "I should have known," Clint muttered, running a hand through his hair. "I should have seen this coming." The familiar feeling of failure washed over him, bitter and cold. It was the same feeling he got when he saw Sarah's disappointed face after missing another school event, or when he caught her trying to hide her tears after a rough day at school. "This isn't your fault, Clint," Mrs. Martinez said firmly, but her words barely registered. Clint pulled out his phone, scrolling through his recent calls. "I'm going to look for him," the police said. I know these streets. Clint cut in, his voice rough. I know where kids like Jeremy might go when they're hurting. I can't just sit here and wait. He turned and strode out of the center, his mind already mapping out possible locations. The Per Jeremy, abandoned warehouse district where teens sometimes gathered. The old train yard, the bridge over Miller's Creek, where Jeremy had once mentioned he went to think. In his truck, Clint's hands gripped the steering wheel so tight, his knuckles turned white. The city streets blurred past as he drove, checking every spot he could think of. Each empty location felt like another failure, another reminder of how he'd let Jeremy down. His phone buzzed, Sarah's school. He should answer it. He knew he should. But right now all he could think about was Jeremy out there somewhere, alone and scared, just like Clint had been after coming home from war. Just like Sarah probably felt every time he shut down and couldn't be the father she needed. The afternoon sun beat down as Clint parked near the creek, scanning the area beneath the bridge. Empty bottles and scattered trash told of teenage gatherings, but no Jeremy. His chest ached with each disappointed search. Back in his truck, Clint slammed his hand against the steering wheel. Come on, kid, where are you? He thought about all the progress Jeremy had made, opening up about his struggles, starting to trust again, even showing up regularly to school. Clint had started to believe he was making a difference, that maybe by helping Jeremy, he could prove to himself that he wasn't completely broken. But now Jeremy was gone, and Clint felt like he was right back where he started, failing everyone who needed him. He drove past the skate park, the mall, the library where Jeremy sometimes studied. Each empty spot felt like another weight added to his shoulders. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the city streets, and still no sign of Jeremy. His phone rang again. Mrs. Martinez this time, Clint answered, hope flaring briefly. Any news? He asked. Nothing yet, she replied, her voice tired. The police are still looking. Clint, you should go home. Sarah, I can't. He cut her off, his voice breaking slightly. I can't give up on him. I've already failed him once. I can't fail him again. The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of all his perceived failures, as a mentor, as a father, as a man trying to piece his life back together. Listen to me, Mrs. Martinez said firmly. You haven't failed anyone. You've been there for Jeremy when no one else was. Whatever's happening now, it's not because you didn't try hard enough. But Clint barely heard her. His mind was filled with images of Jeremy's face the last time they'd talked, of Sarah's expression when he couldn't help her with the bullies, of all the times he'd watched people he cared about slip away because he couldn't be what they needed. He hung up and kept driving, street after street, as the city lights began to flicker on. Every teenage boy he saw made his heart jump, only to crash again when it wasn't Jeremy. The familiar streets seemed to mock him now, holding their secrets about Jeremy's whereabouts. As darkness settled over the city, Clint felt more lost than ever. He'd thought he was helping Jeremy, thought he was finally doing something right. Instead, he'd missed all the warning signs, just like he sometimes missed the signs when Sarah was struggling. The city stretched out before him, vast and indifferent, while somewhere out there Jeremy was alone, just like Clint had been alone with his demons for so long, just like he sometimes still was, even with all the progress he'd made. He turned down another street, his eyes scanning the shadows, looking for any sign of the boy who had started to feel like family. The boy he had failed to protect, just as he sometimes felt he failed to protect Sarah. The night grew darker, and still, Clint drove on, refusing to give up, even as the weight of failure pressed heavier on his heart with each passing minute. The sun was barely peeking over the horizon when Clint pulled into the parking lot of Street Michael's shelter. His eyes were heavy from a night of driving through the city, checking every spot he could think of where Jeremy might go. The call from another youth center volunteer had come just minutes ago. Jeremy had been spotted here. Clint's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white. The shelter's brick building loomed before him, its windows reflecting the orange glow of dawn. He hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, hadn't done anything except search. His phone buzzed, Another text from Sarah asking if he'd found Jeremy. He'd have to call her soon. Inside the shelter, the smell of coffee and breakfast filled the air. A few early risers sat at plastic tables, hunched over steaming cups. Clint's eyes scanned the room, his heart pounding. Then he saw him. Jeremy sat alone in a corner, wearing the same red hoodie from yesterday, looking small and lost. "Jeremy," Clint said softly, approaching the table. The boy's head snapped up, his eyes wide with surprise. And something else. Fear. Maybe. Or shame. "How'd you find me?" His voice was hoarse. "I had help. A lot of people are worried about you." Clint pulled out a chair and sat down, careful to give Jeremy space. "Mind if I join you?" Jeremy shrugged, picking at a loose thread on his sleeve. The dark circles under his eyes matched Clint's own. "Your mom called the center," Clint said gently. "She's worried sick." "Yeah, well, she should have thought about that before letting him come back." Jeremy's words came out bitter and sharp, but his voice cracked at the end. Clint felt the familiar weight of guilt settle in his chest. He should have seen this coming, should have noticed something was wrong. "Want to talk about what happened?" Jeremy was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. He showed up drunk. Again. Started yelling at Mom about money, about me being worthless. He swallowed hard. I couldn't take it anymore. I got between them, and he. Clint's jaw clenched as Jeremy rolled up his sleeve, revealing a dark bruise on his forearm. The sight made his stomach turn. "I should have been there," Clint said, the words heavy with regret. "I should have known something wasn't right." "It's not your job to fix my life," Jeremy muttered, but his eyes were wet. "No, but it is my job to help when I can. That's what we do for each other." Clint leaned forward, trying to catch Jeremy's eye. "I know what it's like to feel like you're carrying the weight of the world alone, to think you have to handle everything by yourself." Jeremy looked up, really looked at Clint for the first time since he'd sat down. "How do you deal with it?" "The anger. He gestured vaguely. "Everything?" Clint took a deep breath. "One day at a time. Sometimes 1 minute at a time. And I am still learning, that it's okay to let people help. Jeremy's voice broke. "I thought if I tried hard enough, if I was good enough, The tears he'd been holding back finally spilled over. But nothing's ever good enough for him. Clint fought the urge to reach out, knowing Jeremy needed space to let it all out. His own heart ached with familiar pain. His own heart, the memory of feeling like he wasn't enough for his own daughter. The constant fear of failing her. "I keep thinking about Mom," Jeremy continued, wiping his eyes with his sleeve. "She's probably freaking out, but I can't go back there." "Not with him." "You don't have to," Clint said firmly. "But running away isn't the answer either. There are people who can help, who want to help." Jeremy's shoulders slumped. "I messed everything up. The program, school." "Nothing's messed up beyond fixing," Clint said, his voice gentle but firm. "I know it feels that way right now, but it's never too late to start over, to try again, even after everything, especially after everything." Clint leaned back in his chair, feeling the weight of his own journey in his words. "Listen, I can help you. Figure this out. We can talk to your mom, find a safe place for you both. The center has resources, connections, but you have to be willing to try." Jeremy was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing patterns on the table's surface. When he looked up again, the hardness in his eyes had softened just slightly. "You'd really help, even after I ran?" "Of course I would." Clint meant it with every fiber of his being. "That's what family does." Jeremy's breath caught at the word family. He blinked rapidly, trying to hide fresh tears. "Okay," he said finally, his voice small but steady. "I'll try." The sun was fully up now, streaming through the shelter's windows. Clint could see the exhaustion on Jeremy's face, but there was something else there too. A tiny spark of hope. "That's all anyone can ask," Clint said softly. "Want to start by calling your mom?" Jeremy nodded slowly. Yeah, I think I'm ready." Clint pulled out his phone, feeling some of the tension leave his shoulders. It wasn't a solution. There would be hard days ahead, difficult conversations, and challenges to face. But it was a start. Sometimes that was enough. Jeremy straightened in his chair, squaring his shoulders as if preparing for battle. But there was trust in his eyes when he looked at Clint, and that made all the difference. The clock on Clint's dashboard read 11:42 p.m. when he finally pulled into his driveway. Every muscle in his body ached from the long day, but there was something different about this exhaustion. It felt purposeful, meaningful. The porch light was still on, casting a warm glow across the front steps of his modest home. Through the living room window, he could see the soft flicker of the television. As he turned his key in the lock, the door creaked open to reveal Sarah curled up on the couch in her favorite purple pajamas, fighting to keep her eyes open. Her math textbook lay abandoned on the coffee table, alongside a half-eaten sandwich. She should have been asleep hours ago. But there she was, waiting for him. "Hey, sweetie," Clint said softly, setting his keys on the side table. "You didn't have to wait up." Sarah sat up straight, rubbing her eyes. "I wanted to make sure you were okay. You didn't answer your texts." Guilt tugged at Clint's heart as he pulled his phone from his pocket. 7 unread messages from his daughter. He'd been so focused on Jeremy that he'd forgotten to check his phone. "I'm sorry, honey. It's been a really long day." "Did you find him?" Sarah asked, her voice small, but filled with concern. "Your friend Jeremy?" Clint sank into the armchair across from her, letting out a deep breath. "Yeah, I found him." He ran a hand through his hair, noticing how Sarah leaned forward, genuinely interested. "He was at Street Michael's shelter downtown. Was he okay?" "He was scared," Clint admitted, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes when people are hurting, they run away, because they don't know what else to do." Sarah nodded, understanding in her young eyes. "Like when I wanted to hide in my room after Tommy made fun of me at school?" "Yeah, kinda like that." Clint smiled sadly, remembering how his daughter had dealt with her own struggles. "But Jeremy and I had a long talk. We sat in the shelter's cafeteria for hours, just talking." "What did you talk about?" Sarah pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. Clint shifted in his chair, surprised by how natural it felt to share this with her. "We talked about his dad, about how sometimes families can hurt each other without meaning to, about how it's okay to be angry, but it's also okay to ask for help." Sarah's eyes never left her father's face as he spoke. "Like how you talked to Dr. Emma." "Exactly like that," Clint said, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. Jeremy was worried that asking for help made him weak. "But you know what I told him?" "What?" "I told him that the strongest people I know are the ones who aren't afraid to say they need help." Clint's voice grew soft as he remembered the moment Jeremy's walls had finally come down. "And I told him about how proud I am of you, how brave you've been dealing with everything at school." Sarah's eyes widened slightly. "You told him about me?" "I did. I told him how my amazing daughter helps me be better every day." Clint felt his throat tighten with emotion. "How watching you face your problems head-on makes me want to do the same." "Did that help him?" Clint nodded, remembering the way Jeremy's shoulders had relaxed, how he'd finally looked up from the table. "It did. He agreed to let me help him talk to his dad tomorrow. We're going to work things out together." Sarah uncurled herself from the couch and walked over to where Clint sat. Without warning, she wrapped her arms around his neck in a tight hug. "I'm proud of you, Dad," she whispered into his ear. The words hit Clint like a physical force, making his heart swell in his chest. His arms wrapped around his daughter automatically, holding her close. In that moment, all the doubt and fear that had plagued him for so long seemed to fade away. He wasn't perfect. He never would be. But maybe that wasn't what mattered. Maybe what mattered was showing up, trying his best, and being there for the people who needed him. For the first time in years, Clint Rhodes felt like he was enough. Not because he'd solved all his problems or fixed everything that was broken, but because he'd stopped running from the things that scared him. He was healing, one small step at a time, and his daughter was right there beside him, watching, learning, and growing too. Sarah's eyes brightened as she sat up straight. "Dad, did you find Jeremy? Is he okay?" Clint sank into his favorite armchair, the leather creaking beneath him. "Yeah, sweetheart. He's safe. We had a long talk at the shelter. He ran a hand through his hair, still processing the day's events. Sometimes people just need someone to listen, you know? Sarah nodded, pulling her knees up to her chest. Like how Dr. Emma listens to you. A small smile tugged at Clint's lips. Yeah, exactly like that. He looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw the wisdom in her young eyes. The same eyes that had watched him struggle through his darkest days were now witnessing his transformation. Tell me about Jeremy, Sarah said, settling in for what had become their routine, sharing stories about the kids at the volunteer center. Clint leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. Well, we talked for hours. He opened up about his dad, about feeling lost. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Sometimes the hardest thing is admitting you need help. Sarah slid off the couch and came to sit cross-legged at his feet, the way she used to when she was younger, and he would read her bedtime stories. Like how you needed help before? The question might have once made him flinch, might have sent him retreating behind his walls, but now it felt natural, honest, exactly like that. And you know what? It's okay to need help. It took me a long time to learn that. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the distant hum of crickets filtering through the window. The living room walls, once feeling like they were closing in on him, now held memories of healing, of movie nights, homework sessions, and countless conversations that had slowly rebuilt their bond. I've been thinking, Clint said, reaching down to ruffle Sarah's hair. Maybe we could start having dinner together more often. Not just quick meals between my volunteering and your homework, but real dinners, where we talk about our day. Sarah's face lit up. Can I help cook? Miss Thompson taught us about measuring ingredients in math class today. Of course you can, Clint chuckled. Though, maybe we should start with something simple. I don't think either of us is ready for your mother's famous lasagna recipe yet. The mention of lasagna. Sarah's mother didn't sting like it used to. It was just another part of their story now, not a wound that needed constant protecting. Dad? Sarah's voice was quieter now, more serious. I really am proud of you. The kids at the center, they look up to you, like Jeremy does. Clint felt his throat tighten with emotion, but not from pain or guilt. This was different. This was pride, love, and acceptance all wrapped into one. Thank you, sweetheart. That means more than you know. The next morning, as Clint prepared breakfast, he found himself moving with a lightness he hadn't felt in years. The kitchen, once a place of hurried meals and avoided conversations, now felt like the heart of their home. Sarah sat at the counter, sorting through her backpack while munching on toast. Hey, Dad, she asked, pulling out a slightly crumpled paper. Could you come to Career Day next month? Some of the kids want to hear about the volunteer center. Clint paused, spatula in hand. A few months ago, the thought of speaking in front of a class would have sent him into a spiral of anxiety. Now he found himself nodding. I'd be honored, Sarah. The mailman's familiar whistle drew their attention. Sarah raced to the door, returning with a handful of envelopes. Dad, there's one from Jeremy. Clint wiped his hands on a dish towel as Sarah handed him the letter. The return address was from State University. His hands were steady as he opened it, unfolding the carefully written pages. Dear Mr. Rhodes, he read aloud, sharing the moment with Sarah. I wanted to let you know that I've officially enrolled in college. The guidance counselor here says I might even qualify for some scholarships. Sarah bounced excitedly in her chair as Clint continued reading. Jeremy's words filled the page with gratitude and hope, thanking Clint for believing in him, for showing him that second chances were possible, for being the father figure he needed when he felt most lost. Pride swelled in Clint's chest as he finished the letter. He thought back to his first day at the volunteer center, how uncertain and broken he had felt. Now, holding Jeremy's letter, he understood what Emma had been trying to tell him all along. Healing wasn't just about fixing what was broken. It was about building something new from the pieces. Can we put it on the fridge? Sarah asked, already reaching for a magnet. Clint handed her the letter, watching as she carefully arranged it next to her latest art project and school photos. The fridge had become a timeline of their journey. Report cards, drawings, and now this letter, each marking a step forward in their lives. "You know what?" Clint said, pulling Sarah into a hug. "I think we should celebrate. How about we try making that lasagna tonight after all?" Sarah's laughter filled the kitchen, bright and unreserved. "Really? But you said we weren't ready." "Well," Clint smiled, "sometimes you just have to take a chance and believe in yourself, even if it means burning a few noodles along the way." The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window, warming their faces as they stood together, looking at Jeremy's letter on the fridge. In that moment, Clint felt the full weight of how far they'd come, not just him and Sarah, but Jeremy too. His work at the volunteer center hadn't just helped others, it had helped him find his way back to being the father Sarah deserved and the man he wanted to be. The evening sun painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink as Clint and Sarah sat together on their front porch. The wooden swing creaked gently as they swayed back and forth, a peaceful rhythm that matched the chirping of crickets in the yard. Sarah leaned against her father's arm, her small hand wrapped in his larger one. "Look at that cloud, Dad," Sarah pointed with her free hand. "It looks like a dragon." Clint smiled, really smiled, and the expression felt natural on his face. "You're right, it does." He squeezed her hand, gently. "You know what? I love watching sunsets with you." Sarah beamed up at him. "Me too. And I love that you're not sad anymore." Her words touched something deep in Clint's heart. She was right. The heavy weight that had pressed down on him for so long had lifted. The memories of war were still there, but they no longer controlled him. Instead of darkness, he now saw light in his life. In Sarah's smile, in Jeremy's progress, in the small victories at the volunteer center. "I'm proud of you," Sarah said suddenly, echoing her words from the night before. "The other kids at school don't make fun of me anymore. They think it's cool that my dad helps people." Clint felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Really?" "Uh-huh. Jenny Martinez told everyone how you helped her big brother at the center. Now they want to hear stories about what you do there." The transformation in his daughter amazed him. Gone was the quiet, withdrawn child who'd been bullied for being a war kid. In her place sat a confident young girl who spoke about her father with pride. It wasn't just Sarah who had changed. Clint knew he was different too. The sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting long shadows across their yard. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the old maple tree, carrying with it the sweet scent of summer flowers from Sarah's small garden. "Dad?" Sarah's voice was thoughtful. "Do you think Jeremy will be okay?" Clint nodded slowly. "I do. He's strong, just like you are. Sometimes people just need someone to believe in them. Like how Dr. Emma believed in you." "Exactly like that." Clint marveled at his daughter's perception. "And how you believed in me too, even when I didn't believe in myself." Sarah snuggled closer. "I always knew you were a good dad. You just forgot for a while." The simple truth in her words made Clint's heart swell. He had forgotten, lost himself in the shadows of his past. But now, sitting here with his daughter, watching the sky turn from orange to deep purple, he felt completely present. The nightmares that had haunted him seemed distant, like fading photographs. The porch light automatically clicked on as darkness began to fall, casting a warm glow around them. In the distance, a car drove past, its headlights briefly illuminating the street before disappearing around the corner. "Can we have hot chocolate?" Sarah asked, looking up at him with hopeful eyes. "With marshmallows?" "Extra marshmallows." Clint chuckled. "Deal." Just then his phone buzzed in his pocket. The screen showed Emma's name, and Clint felt a surge of gratitude for the therapist who had helped him find his way back to himself. "Hi, Emma," he answered, his voice warm. "Hello, Clint. I just wanted to check in and see how you're doing," Sarah whispered. "Tell Dr. Emma I said hi," before slipping off the swing and heading inside to get their hot chocolate started. "Sarah says hi," Clint relayed, watching his daughter through the window as she carefully gathered their supplies. "And I'm doing better, Emma. Better than I ever thought possible." The morning light streamed through the kitchen windows as Clint packed sandwiches into Sarah's favorite lunchbox, the purple one with silver stars. The familiar routine felt different today, charged with a special kind of energy. Sarah bounced around the kitchen in her new volunteer t-shirt, her excitement practically radiating off her. "Dad, can I bring my drawing supplies?" she asked, already pulling her sketchbook from her backpack. "Some of the younger kids might want to color with me." Clint nodded, his heart swelling with pride. "That's really thoughtful of you, sweetheart. I'm sure they'd love that." He watched as she carefully arranged her colored pencils in their case, making sure each one was perfectly aligned. The sight reminded him of how far they'd come. Just months ago, she'd been withdrawn and quiet, afraid to reach out to others. Now, here she was, thinking about how to help other kids feel comfortable. "Remember when you first started volunteering?" Sarah asked, zipping up her backpack. "You were so nervous." Clint chuckled, remembering those early days. "I was terrified," he admitted. "But sometimes, the scariest things turn out to be exactly what we need." Sarah hopped onto a kitchen stool, swinging her legs as she watched him finish packing their lunches. "Like therapy with Miss Emma?" "Exactly like that." Clint paused, thinking about how much Emma had helped him. "Sometimes being brave means asking for help when we need it." "Is Jeremy coming today?" Sarah's eyes lit up at the mention of the teenager who'd become something of a big brother to her. "He sure is. He's helping with the new kids' orientation." Clint smiled, remembering Jeremy's transformation from a troubled teen to a confident young mentor. "He's really excited about starting college next month." Sarah nodded solemnly. "He told me he wants to be a counselor, like Miss Emma." "That's right." Clint checked his watch. "We should get moving, kiddo. Don't want to be late." As Sarah ran upstairs to brush her teeth, Clint took a moment to look around their kitchen. Photos covered the refrigerator now, pictures of them at the volunteer center, Sarah's drawings, and snapshots of happy moments they'd shared. It was so different from the stark, empty space it had been before, when he'd been too afraid to create memories. He remembered the day Sarah had asked to put up her first drawing, a colorful scene of their volunteer group. He'd been hesitant then, worried about opening up their private space. Now, he couldn't imagine the kitchen without these pieces of their life together. Sarah thundered back down the stairs, her backpack bouncing. "Ready," she announced, grinning. Clint grabbed their lunches and his keys. "Got your water bottle?" "Yep." "Sketchbook?" "Check." "Your amazing attitude?" Sarah giggled. "Double check." As they headed toward the front door, Clint caught their reflection in the hallway mirror. Sarah's ponytail bounced with each step, her face bright with anticipation. Behind her he saw himself, standing tall, shoulders relaxed, a natural smile on his face. The haunted look that had once dominated his expression was gone, replaced by something lighter, more peaceful. He remembered the first time he'd looked in this mirror, after returning from deployment. He barely recognized himself then, lost in the shadows of trauma and guilt. Now he saw a different man, still carrying his experiences, but no longer defined by them. Sarah tugged at his hand. "Dad, you okay?" "Yeah, sweetheart." He squeezed her hand gently. "Just thinking about how lucky I am." She beamed up at him. "Me too. I love our volunteer days together." Clint knelt down to her level, meeting her eyes. The trust and love he saw there still amazed him. This little girl had never given up on him, even when he'd nearly given up on himself. She'd been his anchor, his reason to keep trying, to keep fighting through the darkness. "You know what, Sarah? You're the bravest person I know." She tilted her head, confused. "But you're the soldier. Being brave isn't just about fighting in wars," he explained softly. "It's about standing by someone when things get tough. It's about believing in people, even when they don't believe in themselves. That's what you did for me." Sarah wrapped her arms around his neck in a tight hug. "That's what you do for everybody at the volunteer center, Dad. You help them be brave, too." Clint held her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. When they pulled apart, he saw tears shining in her eyes, matching the ones in his own. But these weren't tears of sadness or fear. They were tears of joy, of healing, of love. Standing up, he grabbed their bags and opened the front door. The morning sun was bright and warm on their faces, promising a beautiful day ahead. Birds sang in the maple tree they'd planted together last spring, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers from their garden. As they stepped onto the porch, Clint looked down at his daughter, his heart full of pride and gratitude. She'd grown so much, not just in height, but in spirit. She was confident, compassionate, and strong, everything he'd hoped she would become, despite his fears that his own struggles would hold her back. "We made it, kiddo," he whispered, the words carrying all the weight of their journey together. Sarah smiled up at him, squeezing his hand tightly. In that moment, Clint knew with absolute certainty that they were exactly where they belonged. Not just surviving, but truly living, ready to help others find their way through the darkness too. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Clint Rhodes, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.